This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about voice content marketing. What the heck is that? There's always something new we have to keep track of. And of course, voice marketing, harnessing the power of conversational AI. We've talked about AI a lot lately, it seems, is a topic in Scot and Susan Westwater's latest book. Just came out. We did a little bit of a live stream. I don't know, seems like a few months ago by now. And certainly it's a good read. What do we need to know when it comes to voice content marketing? What's important? What's not important? And we'll go from there. So, Susan and Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
And in case anyone is judging me, that behind us is Christoph's Content Corner. So welcome to my little corner of the world. Not a very big corner, but it is what it is. So, voice content marketing. What the heck is that?
So, voice content marketing is just what it sounds like, right? It's doing content marketing, but adding your content and making it audio accessible, making it also engaged with voice enabled. So that's either asking for that information or getting that back from an audio perspective.
Well, that's it. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Great definition. I mean, to the point. But you know what?
Simple.
Super simple. But let's dive into that a little bit more. I mean, what do we have to know as a content marketer when it comes to the context, the concept of voice in content marketing? And I mean, there's many different avenues maybe to go down, right? I mean, I've used 11 Labs to clone my own voice and even publish a podcast episode with a clone voice. And it wasn't horrible.
No.
And it was not, you don't get this cheery, bald guy over here talking to you, but it worked, right?
Yeah.
So that works. And then you have on the other side, people searching for stuff. Of course, we talked about that before. But how do people even understand how that would look in their day-to-day? What should they do? What do they need to do?
Well, I think the big thing to know is in voice, it's the same challenges that we have in other channels. So your customers likely have the same issues regardless during awareness, consideration, etc. And so voice is really just a different way to engage with it. But the topics and the questions and the problems that they have are going to be similar, if not the same, as it is in mobile, as it is in social, as it is in some of the other channels. So I think that's really kind of the first area to focus on. And like you said, voice search is a component of it. Adding voice capabilities to mobile applications or websites is part of it. Chatbots could be part of it. And even using Amazon Alexa, that could actually be part of your strategy. So really this voice ecosystem gives you some additional touch points and additional ways to connect with your audience. But the idea of frequently asked questions 100% comes into play here. So if you're just creating content and people aren't requesting or asking for it, it's never going to be surfaced. It's never going to be shown. So it's incumbent to make sure that you're actually providing information that people are actually truly looking for.
Yeah. And there essentially are three different types of engagements that happen with content. And I'm borrowing this from Preston So, because I want to give him proper credit of talking about this categorization. And it is, we think of them as someone's coming from a transactional perspective. I want to get a task done. So these are the types of ways I'm going to engage, of trying to further that along. Then there's informational, of, like, as Scott was just referencing, frequently asked questions. And then there's this third category, which is very small. I'll be honest, it's early days. I think we saw it, but it's social. It's that social connection of, through your voice, either connecting with a brand, connecting with an influencer, connecting with celebrity. I think for a quick moment, we thought maybe Clubhouse was going to become that great example, but obviously that's become much more niche and much more popular, less popular than it was before, now that we can get out of our homes and get together in person again.
It's very interesting to me how these networks, they just kind of change.
Yeah.
Like, Clubhouse comes, or how they evolve, right? Clubhouse just comes on the scene, blows everything up. And guess what? It's like, now it's gone. I don't even have it on my phone anymore, I don't think. And then same with Threads. Everybody's on Threads. And I was like, hey, I'm user 166,000 out of whatever, 100 some million. But like, nobody even does anything on Threads from what I can see. So it is
Yeah.
kind of interesting to
Yeah.
figure out what you stay in. Now, when we try to, let's talk about let's go back to optimizing in a little bit content for voice, but let's talk about a consumer connecting with a brand
Mhm.
through the voice. And like, obviously I can talk to my assistant, and say, hey, I need to know whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it pulls it up depending on who it is. Some of them are worse than others, but there's not much response through the voice from any brands. I mean, so that could be, I guess, a potential opportunity for
Mhm.
brands
For
to
sure.
out. But how do they do that?
Yeah. So there's the first thing you do is when you think about optimizing is what does your brand sound like? And that's part of the reason why you don't hear as much response. Some of it's also the volume of information. What you're giving, it's just like where we're talking right now of sound bites and speaking in that way versus let me give you a big long list of 4 different things. So as we think about our content and preparing something to make that back and forth, it's how do we keep those snippets of information, but also, and I think this is where things are becoming super exciting,
Mhm.
is that we're now at a point where we can start, as you talked about, synthetic voice and things along those lines of how do I make this a really good interaction with that front end. I do think of voice experiences of that back and forth, those conversations where that input's happening. I consider that front end. And then how we organize that answers. Is it going into a large language model? Is it simply going and using a list of potential responses that are triggered by different keywords? Those types of flows and those things, that's more of the back end. And then very similar to your structured content world, which is important to know, like as a content marketer, if you're already structuring your content, this is another way you can use that content. But thinking about how does my brand sound? What are the audio nuances I can do, not just to make it a better experience, but to connect it back to the mothership, so to speak, because it is still a new channel these days. Newer, less new, but it is still something that is newer. So how do we make sure we're pointing back and showing the authenticity? Because when we start using synthetic media, people do question, is this a deep fake? Is this legit? So we always have to think about that of how do we make sure we've got those signals that say, yep, you're in the right place, which goes back to the 3 questions of content strategy of is this the right place? Is this the right company? Can they help me with my problem? Why do I want to work with them? And continue to endeavor that. So again, it's a very similar value prop. It's just that delivery of where we think about that.
Yeah, and it's much like what you were talking about with the synthetic voice and cloning your voice. You can also do that with your visual likeness. So you can create a digital avatar of yourself and have someone, actually have a conversation with you or your brand ambassador or your, mascot or whatever you have. And so there is a visual component to it now as well. So I know this is a bad example, but remember Clippy back in the 90s, from Microsoft. And there's a lot of reasons why it was a horrible experience and why it was annoying and people generally hated it. But the idea that you're actually talking to a thing versus just a little text window that you can type into, I think you're going to see that become more and more prevalent, as the technology matures, as it becomes a little bit more cost effective to do digital cloning of like your likeness or whatever. I could see that becoming kind of the chat window, and it's almost like you're talking to a real person, almost like picture in picture.
I know people will hate me for saying it, but who you should watch to see what's coming is the people that work in the corn industry, corn with a P, right? And I'll give you an example. I saw this the other day somewhere. There was an article, and it's this adult performer. I guess that's what they're called. But she has personal interactions with a lot of people.
Mhm.
And of course, if it's only you, right? Like
Mhm.
I can only do so many podcasts. Not that
Yeah.
anybody would want to talk to me in that capacity, but they talk to her in that
Yeah.
capacity,
Yeah.
right? And so what she's doing is she created this AI. I don't know if the right term is clone or whatever, but of her voice, right?
Mhm.
So like you can have a conversation with her.
Right.
And of course, now she literally is scaling her one-on-one conversations because it sounds just like her. And I don't know, I guess people don't care.
Right.
So I'm just saying that's like another thing, like, look at that. Like people will say, well, how can you scale it? Or, whatever, like that's how you scale it. But outside of the corn industry, what should, I'm not even sure she's in porn, probably not. Adult industry, I guess. What's like that use case for other companies, like in B2B, for example?
Sales is one thing.
Mhm.
So sales enablement and warming
Okay.
up leads and pre-qualifying leads. Because I mean, every time you talk to a salesperson, there's probably 20 or 30 questions that they get 20 to 30 times a day. And so if you can kind of skip to the juicy stuff and the things that people really need to focus in on for those conversations, that's going to help warm up the leads. Theoretically, your close rate should go up because you are talking to more qualified folks. So that could be a big area, and there's definitely companies that are exploring specifically that in the B2B space. One of our clients is actually a sonic branding agency out of Paris, and we created a Amazon Alexa skill and a Google action to basically answer questions about what is sonic branding, specifically designed for agencies and brands so they can understand what it is, why they need it, and then ultimately have better conversations with the sonic branding agency once they're ready to actually pull the trigger.
And the nice thing with that is they could actually demo their examples. And because it was audio, it was easy to do that versus clicking on a button.
Yep.
You could just ask for that thing. But I mean, as we've seen, and in our previous research from the Voice Consumer Index, there are use cases at the awareness, consideration, purchase, and retention.
Yep.
It's guided onboarding, troubleshooting. Obviously, customer service is a very easy one to do because you can tell the ROI by reduced call volume.
Right.
But there's also upselling and ways of that, delivery tracking, or also just making it possible to answer simple questions about your industry or that are specific to credibility and brand building, such as, if there is blog content you have, or even this podcast, making that available so that you can show that to basically support your expertise, but also get that information out and to do some evangelization and education. I think that's the important thing that we find a lot, is that now everything that happens in a voice experience is on demand. So the nice thing is, the good news is, it's what they want to hear. The bad news is if you don't have the right content, or you've got content they're not asking for, it'll never get surfaced. And so that's another piece of this where we watch the metrics to see what people are asking for and what we can and can't answer, so that we can be able to iterate that. And that's similar to, I think, what any good content marketing or social program will do, is launched isn't done. It's making sure that you're refining and looking at the behavior and analytics after you've already put something out in the marketplace, and then adjusting accordingly to see what areas people want to know more about and what areas are just frankly not asking about.
Yeah. And the other part of it is you could add there's platforms that exist that allow you to put your content in a singular place and then deploy it to a mobile application, to your website, to social channels. So like Facebook Messenger could be powered by it. WhatsApp could be powered by it. And so you basically have a single source of truth. And the cool thing about that is if you have it across your entire ecosystem, you're really getting a good handle on what questions people have based on what platform they're on or what channel they're in. And so it becomes this really incredible customer insights tool as well, because you hear directly in their voice, not literally directly, but you hear what they're asking for, de-identified, and you don't know specifically who they are. I do want to caveat that. But the cool thing is you do have intent, you do have the word choice, the language, the ontology. So you get all this rich data that you can actually use to inform your content in other channels as well.
It's just very interesting how it's all going to evolve to me. And I know you guys talked about this on one of the previous episodes, like the different buckets, I guess, right? You have people searching for voice, you have voice content, whatever. And when I look at content online, I mean, when I think of voice content marketing, a lot of times it's really, it's written content, right? I mean, very few people actually do good audio content. I mean, I guess people do podcasts. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But certainly it's not that common outside from
Not
podcasts,
yet.
I would say. I mean, some people put like the little player, like Trinity Audio on their
Yeah.
website, Trinity AI or whatever they're called, where it would read your article. But it's not that common. So I do think there's probably some opportunity there for brands to kind of get on that bandwagon
Mhm.
and create um, audio, I guess, at
Yep.
Yeah.
scale to connect with people. Now, if you do that, now you guys were nodding, so I'll take that as a yep, you agree.
Yep.
Christoph
Mhm.
said something smart. Finally, 16 minutes into the show, but how do you have to disclose that? I mean, like, for example, I put on my website, I have an AI disclaimer, and I say,
Mhm.
here's how I use AI. Not all the time, but sometimes I do this. Like,
Yeah.
all my content is my own source content,
Mhm.
but I use AI. Like this episode, I will take this episode, push it into AI and say, okay, write me show notes or
Yep.
write me, an article.
Yep.
And then I have to clean it up because there's a bunch of garbage in there,
Sure.
Right.
100%.
Sure.
And then I use Opus clips to create audio clips
Oh,
like
nice.
that or video clips.
Yeah.
So how do brands do that? How do they scale, being more of an audio brand, I guess?
There's tools that exist now that weren't available even 6 months ago that allow you to, I hate this term, but 10x your process. And so I'm a firm believer that in order to use these tools to shortcut it, you actually have to know how to do it manually. And so whether it's video editing or audio or content creation, strategy, whatever, like you have to know how to do that craft in order to figure out how these tools can shortcut the process. And there's tools that I've seen that allow you to upload long form content, video content, and it'll generate what it calls viral video clips that you can upload to TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever. But basically, looking at tools, and there's no shortage of those things that exist now. And it
Yeah.
seems like there's hundreds that crop up every day. But there's tools out there that help you identify long tail keyword phrases and then create blog content based on that. There's tools that help you, create clips based on long form content. Rev.com is a great tool to actually upload transcripts and get long form content. And we talked about this on a previous episode. That's actually how we wrote our first book, was actually from the presentations that we've given, the talks we've given, and also just sitting down and recording almost like a podcast and speaking it into existence. So those are some of the ways that we, even as a smaller team, have actually used these tools to really produce as much as a larger team.
Yeah. And it comes down to also is thinking about where your audience is,
Yeah.
the problem that they are trying to solve, or the question they are trying to answer, or thing they're trying to do. And then say to yourself, okay, which of these lend themselves to an audio situation? In some ways, it's really helpful because it's easier to talk than type.
Yep.
Or if it's just in a situation where it's not conducive, then are they talking into a mobile device through your app? Are they talking to a smart speaker because you're putting it on the Amazon ecosystem? Or are they on the phone, or are they doing all those things?
Yeah.
Thinking about those placements, then thinking through what are we going to answer, and then thinking through your roadmap. And it sounds like a lot, but it's important to know where you're going before you start taking that journey. There is a lot of information you can draw from that you already have, but it's important to make sure that you're thinking through that, because it's really easy to ideate 100 ways you're going to use this thing, and then it never gets off the ground because it takes 18 months of development.
Right.
So I think it's important to start with an assessment of where it is we're trying to solve. Where are we looking for? Is this an internal tool? Because that's the other part of this too, is from an enterprise level, you can use it internally or you can use it externally. Now, if we're using, you're asking about disclosures and things along those lines, if we're not generating it with AI and it's just natural language, yes. Now, if I am using any of that information and collecting it and then using it for personalization or anything like that, it's just like using cookies. You have to make that disclosure and that transparency, just because it's trust,
Yeah.
right? And giving that and managing that expectation. And I think the other thing too that I just want to mention from previous use cases is there are ways that you don't have to go and build yourselves a Domino's DOM that's going to make it so that you are on 300 different places. There's 12 different ways to order my product. You can start somewhat small, and not even small, but just sort of efficient, and thinking through that way. Or if I just need to do this to support a launch of a product and it's time bound, there are ways that you can use voice marketing and you can use voice content marketing from a promotional standpoint of delivering and time boxing how long that experience is available or exists, as opposed to I have just decided to launch 1,000 ships that are going to keep from there. That's where that planning comes into play. Then you can put those requirements that'll help you understand how big of a lift or how many APIs you have to dial into or things like that.
Yeah, and we actually did a B2B and a B2C experiment with a local energy company here in Illinois. And basically, they promoted it through traditional channels, radio, Blackhawks and Bulls basketball games, etc. But basically, it was a small experience to talk about rebates and savings. And so there was a consumer version and a business version. And we actually saw a tremendous amount of traffic. And it was kind of like let's see what happens. Let's put it out there and see what happens. And we actually got quite a few thousand people to actually use the experience. And so that was a promotion. That was just learn more. And rather than driving them directly to the website, we told them to talk to their Google Assistant on their phone. And then ultimately, we sent them links to the website where they could learn more information. So we do have some data that actually shows that promoting this or creating promotions with it is also a viable channel to get your message out there.
Interesting. And so really quickly, because I keep forgetting, and we're almost out of time, but we are live streaming on Amazon. So by the way, everything you see around me, you can buy on Amazon, the sound panels, that fake plant back here, the football helmets. Unfortunately, you can't buy them. But everything else, my chair, everything. And while we're talking about Amazon, the Westwater's first book, Voice Strategy, is currently 72% off on Amazon. So the way to get to that, you just have to you have to scan this code down here, or you can just search for Christoph Trapp on Amazon and find my storefront and find their book. So certainly that's easy to do. Now, I know we're going to run out of time here, but maybe really quickly, give us some tips on how to choose technology. And I'll give you my 2 cents on that really briefly, is when I pick technology, I want to test it. I'll give you an example. Big Otter AI fan. Use it daily. I probably used it 7 times today already. But I was able to just test it, right? I was able to get in, and then if I wanted to use it more, I have to pay more. And if I want to do this and this, I have to pay more. So big fan of doing that because there's so many tools out there. Opus Clips, same thing. They give you like an hour to test stuff, right? And then once you upload hours and hours and hours of stuff, now you have to do, but you can get in there. What other tips do you have really quickly, like 20 seconds?
Post Cheetah is a great tool for SEO, and they have a trial. There's a tool that I'm actually using right now. I believe it's called rewind.ai, and it actually helps you keep track of your day and basically sees all the different things you do locally. It doesn't put it up in the cloud, and then you can actually go back and search for it. Because I always are like, oh yeah, where on Twitter was it, or where on LinkedIn did I see that? And I literally can just go into Rewind and type what I think it was, and it'll find it for me.
Yep. And if you're mapping out conversational experiences, one of the gold standards is VoiceFlow. And I do believe they have a free trial in the beginning, so you can start to map out some simplicity things. There's also Voicify as well. And that also helps you go across multi-channel.
There's so many tools. I think the trick is just to figure out what works for you and what can help you get things done. Really briefly, really appreciate you guys coming on, but tell us, who should reach out to you? Who do you work with? Who are your perfect clients? Thanks so much for joining me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So we work with agencies, and we're actually agency veterans ourselves. So we like to educate agencies and help them figure out how to service their clients and how they can bring conversational AI and voice to them. But we also work directly with brands. So, if you're a brand and you're interested in this, you definitely want to check out our book. But reach out to either Susan or myself. We're both active on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we're happy to have a conversation.
Absolutely. And that's the Westwater.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.